The wind that night carried a strange heaviness, cold, but not the kind that comes from weather. It was the weight of silence, the kind that gathers around ruins when the world has forgotten what happened inside them. My boots pressed softly into the damp earth as I walked beneath the crumbling gate of Greystone Castle. The moon was sharp and white above, outlining the towers that still stood like broken teeth against the sky. The camera on my shoulder blinked red, the recording had begun. My voice, low and even, filled the emptiness. "People think castles were safe," I said. "They imagine warmth, feasts, laughter, and knights guarding high walls. But the truth is, these walls weren't built for living. They were built for fear. And for many who entered them, they became tombs." The wind hissed through the cracks like something breathing. I glanced down a hallway where the stones shimmered faintly with moisture. The place smelled of moss and old iron. Every step I took sent an echo crawling up the stairwells. I stopped beside a narrow window slit, one of the arrow loops defenders used centuries ago. It was barely wide enough for my hand. "See this?" I said to the lens. This was all they had for light. And when the fires burned and smoke filled the rooms, these slits did nothing. They trapped the air, the heat, the people. I looked through it, the night outside looked black as ink. The story of Greystone had always drawn me in. On paper it was just another fortress lost to time, but in the records I found a name, Thomas, a servant boy who had survived when no one else did. No one knew how. His testimony was brief, written decades later, before he disappeared into the countryside. Tonight, I had come to find the truth buried beneath his words. I set the camera on a stone ledge and took out my notebook. "Greystone Keep," I murmured. "Built in 1338. Fell in 1346. Siege by Baron Haldon." The walls around me seemed to lean closer. My light flickered. Somewhere deep in the castle, I thought I heard the faint creak of a door, or maybe just the groan of wind through old wood. I started walking again, my voice carrying softly through the corridors. Thomas was 16 when he came here. His mother sold their last goat for his place as a servant. He thought it would mean safety. Bread. Maybe a future. I paused, brushing dust off a broken stair. He was wrong. The story unfolded in my head as clearly as if I were watching it. The year was cold. The harvest had failed. The people outside the castle walls were starving, but Lord Edric, Greystone's master, was more concerned with his rival, Baron Haldon, whose army was marching north. To Edric, safety meant walls. To the villagers, it meant mercy. I could almost see it, the castle alive with torches and shouting men, the clang of iron against stone. Thomas, small and thin, carrying buckets of water past guards who barely noticed him. The kitchens thick with smoke from the hearths that never went out. The smell, meat, sweat, sickness, so strong it turned the stomach. Castles were meant to protect, but protection came at a cost. The higher the walls, the less the air moved. The narrower the passages, the faster disease spread. People lived pressed together, knights, servants, animals, all breathing the same foul air. Thomas learned quickly that life in Greystone was not the grand tale told by poets. The moat stank of decay. Waste flowed down channels carved into the rock. The well water tasted of iron. And when rain fell, it leaked through the ceilings, pooling in corners where mold grew thick and green. Still, Thomas believed he was lucky. He had a bed of straw, a bit of bread each day, and a roof over his head. Until the day the bells rang. The first stone from Baron Haldon's catapults hit the outer wall at dawn. The sound, Thomas would later write, was like the sky itself splitting open. The second strike came before the echoes of the first had faded. By the third, the Lord had ordered the gates sealed. I stopped walking. The air in the ruin seemed to change, denser somehow. I could imagine it, the sound of chains as the gates slammed shut, the smell of smoke rising from fires lit to keep the cold out. Inside, they told themselves it would be over in a week. But weeks turned to months. The enemy outside didn't need to breach the walls. They only needed to wait. Inside, food rotted, air thickened, and people began to die. I ran my hand along the damp stone beside me. I whispered to the camera, this is where the trap begins. You build walls to keep danger out. But what if the danger's already inside? In Thomas's account, the sickness began among the children. Coughs at night. Fever. Then the servants, the soldiers, even the noble ladies. Lord Edric ordered anyone sick to be locked in the lower chambers, for the good of the living, he said. Thomas was among those ordered to carry food down to them. I could almost see him, walking with a torch through the winding stair. The walls sweating, the air stale. Below, the sick whispering in the dark. Don't go down there, the other servants warned. But he did. Because he had no choice. He wrote that the sound of coughing echoed like waves breaking. The torches flickered, and he could feel the heat of bodies packed close. He tried to pray, but the air was so foul that every breath tasted like rust. That's when he met Maeve. I stopped near a broken arch where vines now grew wild. The moonlight fell through it, painting silver across the floor. Maeve, I said aloud, as though the stones might remember the name. The castle healer. The only one who tried to fight the sickness. In his writings, Thomas said Maeve was old, small, and fearless. She carried herbs in a pouch and never bowed to the Lord. She called the castle a beast, said it was feeding on them. Walls keep fear alive, she told him once. They make men think they're safe, when really they're just trapped. Outside the castle, the army waited. Inside, people starved. The fires never stopped burning, filling the upper halls with smoke. The arrow loops did nothing to clear the air. By midwinter, the dead outnumbered the living. I sat on a fallen stone, closing my eyes. For a moment, I could almost feel the heat of those fires, hear the muffled cries. History wasn't written in ink, it was written in the air, in the stones, in the silence left behind. Thomas said the smell was the worst, I whispered. The smell of rot and fear mixed together. You can't build walls against that. Then came the fire. No one knew exactly how it started. Some said it was a candle dropped in the kitchen. Others whispered it was Maeve's doing, a mercy, to end their suffering. But in the end, it didn't matter. Flames spread fast through Greystone. The smoke rose so thick that those in the upper floors suffocated before they ever saw the fire. The narrow stairs became death traps, too tight to climb quickly, too steep to descend. The very design that made the castle defensible made it impossible to escape. I imagined Thomas, running through the smoke, trying to find Maeve. The heat blistering his skin, his lungs burning with every breath. The hallways glowing red, walls cracking, timbers falling. He would find her near the chapel, carrying a child too weak to walk. I could almost hear her voice, take her. Go. There's a tunnel under the kitchen, flooded, but it might still lead out. Thomas would hesitate. What about you? I'll stay, she'd say. Someone must face the beast. The rest of his account was barely legible, just broken sentences and ash-stained words. But he made it. Somehow, he escaped through the flooded passage beneath the moat, carrying the child. When he looked back, Greystone was burning like a sun. The flames devoured everything, the Lord, the knights, the servants, the songs, the prayers. All gone. The castle didn't fall to an enemy. It fell to itself. I stood up slowly, the cold biting through my coat. My flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat, the shadows around me seemed to move. I looked down the long corridor and thought I saw something shift, maybe dust, maybe smoke. You can still feel it, I said softly. 800 years later, and the air still remembers. I packed my camera and started walking toward the outer wall. The night was quieter now. No wind, no whisper. Just the faint creak of my own footsteps. Before leaving, I turned once more to face the castle. Thomas survived, I said to the lens. But he carried the ghosts with him. And he wrote something before he died, something that I think was meant for us. I opened my notebook and read aloud. We built our prison with our own hands and called it safety. The walls kept the world out, but they also kept the truth from getting in. The wind picked up again, cold and restless. I turned off the camera and stood there, watching the moon drift behind the tower. The ruin loomed silent, but I could almost swear I heard a whisper in the dark, soft, almost human. I whispered back, "I'll tell your story." The light faded. The sound of the wind rose. And as I stepped beyond the gate, leaving Greystone behind, I knew this was only the beginning. Because there were still deeper chambers beneath the earth, sealed rooms, untouched for centuries, where the truth of the castle's final hours might still be waiting. And tomorrow night, I would go back down there. The second night was colder. A thin mist drifted over the moat, wrapping the ruins in a pale veil that shimmered beneath my flashlight. I parked the car farther down the dirt road this time, no need for the engine's hum to disturb the silence, and walked the rest of the way alone. The world around me felt older than it had the night before, as if every tree had grown out of some buried memory. When I reached the gate, the air inside the courtyard was different. Still, but watchful. I turned on the camera, the red light blinked like a tiny heartbeat. "Night 2, I said quietly. "We're going back under Greystone, down to the lower chambers where the last survivors were sealed. History calls it a fortress. Tonight, we'll see what it really was." The stone arch swallowed my light as I stepped through. My voice echoed off the walls. Every sound, my breath, my boots, seemed to repeat itself in whispers. Somewhere water dripped steadily, like the ticking of a clock. I followed the narrow passage toward the kitchens, the same path Thomas must have taken. The walls sweated with damp. My light caught strange markings, scratches, circles, old symbols that might have been letters once. I ran my fingers over them, they felt sharp, deliberate. "They say stone remembers," I murmured. "Maybe this is how it speaks." The doorway to the cellar yawned ahead. I had to crouch to fit through. The smell of earth and age grew stronger the deeper I went. My camera light cut a thin path through the darkness, landing on collapsed barrels, rusted chains, and broken pottery. Rats skittered away into cracks. In the center of the chamber stood an iron door, half buried in mud. I'd read about it in the excavation notes, sealed centuries ago, never opened. The door to the lower vaults, where the sick had been sent when the plague spread through the castle. I brushed the mud away from a carved emblem on the door, a serpent eating its own tail. "The Ouroboros," I whispered. "The endless circle. Life feeding on itself." As I spoke, the air shifted. A faint breath of cold slid past my ear, carrying the faintest smell of smoke. I froze, listening. Nothing. Only the steady drip of water. I took out my crowbar and pried at the rusted latch. It screamed in protest, metal against metal, until finally it gave way. The door swung inward with a sigh that seemed too human. Behind it, stairs spiraled down into blackness. I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to turn back, but I'd come too far. I adjusted the camera on my chest and began to descend. The air grew colder, heavier. My breath misted in the beam of light. At the bottom, the passage opened into a large vault, the ceiling lost in darkness. The floor was uneven, littered with old bones and collapsed beams. But on one wall, half hidden behind rubble, I saw a faint shimmer, something carved, catching the light. I brushed away the dirt. It was a mural. The colors were faded, but I could still make out the scene, a castle surrounded by fire, and inside, people kneeling before a great serpent of stone. Around them, tiny figures reaching out as if begging. At the bottom were words, carved in Latin, Custodiendo mortem, vitam amus imus. By guarding against death, I translated softly, we lost life. My throat tightened. This wasn't just decoration, it was confession. Someone had carved it after the fire. Someone who wanted the world to know what Greystone had become. I turned, sweeping my light across the vault. In one corner stood a low stone bench, and upon it, a small leather-bound book, half burned but still intact. I picked it up carefully. The cover crumbled under my fingers, but inside, the ink had survived. The handwriting was rough, but I knew it instantly. Thomas. The pages were dated a few years after the siege, written by a man who couldn't let go of what he'd seen. I began to read aloud, my voice echoing softly. The fire took the body of the beast, but not its hunger. I see it in dreams. The walls breathing. The doors closing by themselves. We thought the fire freed us, but it only taught us that safety is the cruelest lie. The Lord is dead, yet his voice still calls to me. Keep them in, he says. Keep them safe. The next lines were scratched hurriedly, as if written in panic. I came back tonight. The tunnels are alive with whispers. I saw her, the healer, Maeve, standing where the chapel was. She said, fear built these walls. Fear will keep them standing. Then she vanished. I lowered the book. For a long moment, I just listened to the quiet. Somewhere behind me, the sound of water shifted, like a footstep. I swung the light around. Empty space. My pulse thudded in my ears. This place, I said to the camera, it doesn't just remember death. It repeats it. I took a few careful steps forward. The floor dipped sharply, forming a pit filled with murky water. The beam of my light caught a glint at the bottom, metal. I crouched, reaching with my hand. My fingers brushed something cold, a small ring. When I pulled it up, I saw it was engraved with a crest, two serpents intertwined. Lord Edric's family seal. The moment I touched it, a faint sound drifted through the chamber, distant, muffled, like someone whispering my name. I froze. Thomas? I said before I could stop myself. The sound faded. I pocketed the ring and turned back toward the stairs. The air behind me seemed to pulse, almost breathe. My flashlight flickered. For a second, the shadows along the wall seemed to twist into shapes, faces, mouths open in silent cries. Then they were gone. Back on the surface, the wind hit me like a wave. I shut the door behind me and leaned against the wall, gasping. The night air smelled sharp, alive. The castle above looked the same, but something in it felt aware. I turned to the camera. Thomas came back, I said. He thought the fire ended it, but something pulled him here again. And he wasn't the only one. This place feeds on fear, the same fear that built it. I started to walk back toward the courtyard, but halfway there I stopped. The ground beneath my feet was vibrating, faint, rhythmic. I crouched, pressed my hand to the soil. It was coming from below. Without thinking, I went back to the iron door. I placed the camera on a rock, aiming it at me. If this recording stops, I said quietly, maybe that's for the best. I pulled the door open again and stepped inside. The air rushed past me, colder than before. I descended fast, light shaking. When I reached the vault, I realized the vibration wasn't sound, it was breathing. The air itself was pulsing. My light swept across the mural, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, the serpent's eyes gleaming faintly. I blinked. The mural was still. But in the center of the floor, the water was rippling, though nothing touched it. I crouched closer. The ripples formed a pattern, circles widening, closing, widening again, like a heartbeat. Thomas's book slipped from my hand and landed open on a page near the end. I bent to read. If anyone finds this, the final entry read, remember, the castle was built on fear, and fear does not die. It only waits for the next soul to listen. Something in the darkness shifted, a breath that wasn't mine. I stood up quickly, backing away. My light caught a figure standing at the far end of the vault. A woman, small, her hair white, her face half-shadowed. She looked at me, and though her lips didn't move, I heard her voice in my head. You wanted the truth, she said. Now carry it. The figure vanished. The air went still again. My light dimmed. For a long time I just stood there, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Finally, I picked up the book and turned back toward the stairs. When I reached the courtyard, dawn was breaking. The mist glowed gold around the stones. I sat down on the cold ground, the book in my lap, and watched the sun rise behind the towers. Thomas came back, I whispered. So did I. Maybe we all do, one way or another. I looked into the camera lens. The people of Greystone thought the walls would save them. They built them high, thick, unbreakable. But walls don't save anyone. They only hide the truth until it's too late. And maybe, I said, glancing at the silent castle, that's the real trap. The camera light blinked out as the sun climbed higher. The ruins stood quiet, golden and cold. But deep beneath them, in the darkness I'd left behind, something began to move again, slow, like stone breathing. The circle never ended. The third night came with rain. Thin, needling, relentless rain that turned the roads to mirrors and the air to glass. I told myself I wouldn't come back, not after what I saw, not after hearing her voice, but some places don't let you go once you've stepped inside their story. Greystone Castle stood waiting at the edge of the moor, its broken towers black against the lightning. I parked by the old chapel wall and stepped into the downpour. My camera flickered to life, red light blinking. Final night, I said quietly. Greystone was built to protect, but it ended as a tomb. I think I finally understand why. The rain hissed through the courtyard. The stones glistened like bones. I walked toward the keep, my boots sinking into the mud where the moat had once been. The ground felt soft, hollow, like something breathing just beneath it. Inside, the corridors were darker than before. My flashlight beam quivered against the walls. I passed the kitchens, the iron door, the stair that led down to the vaults. But tonight I didn't go down. Tonight I went up, toward the tower where Thomas had once stood during the fire, watching everything he loved burn. The staircase wound tight around the core of the tower. Each step creaked, soaked with centuries of damp. Halfway up, I paused. A faint sound echoed down the stairwell, footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned my light downward, but there was nothing. Only darkness breathing. At the top, the room was open to the sky. Rain poured through the shattered roof, drumming against the stone floor. From here I could see the whole castle spread below me, walls like ribs, gates like a mouth. I raised the camera. This was Thomas's view, I said. The night the fire came. The walls meant to protect him turned into his cage. That's the irony of every fortress, safety built on fear becomes its own kind of death. Lightning flashed. For a heartbeat, I saw a figure standing across the room, a man in a tattered cloak, staring out into the rain. His shoulders heavy, his hair silvered with ash. Thomas. I blinked, and he was gone. But his voice lingered, soft as the rain. We thought we could keep the world out, he whispered. We forgot the world was already inside. I stood there, shaking, not from fear but from understanding. The castle wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by the idea that built it, the need to be safe, whatever the cost. I turned back toward the stairs. That's when I saw the mural. I hadn't noticed it before, half hidden behind a fallen beam, carved directly into the inner wall of the tower. A serpent again, but this time its mouth was open, releasing something small and bright. A human figure stepping free. Beneath it, more Latin words, Salvite Circulum. Break the circle, I translated. A gust of wind tore through the opening. My flashlight flickered, then died. For a moment I stood in darkness, listening to the storm rage outside. When the light came back, I wasn't in the tower anymore. I was standing in a great hall. The walls were whole, tapestries fluttering in candlelight. The air smelled of wood smoke and iron. Around me, people hurried, servants carrying buckets of water, guards shouting orders. And in the center, Thomas stood beside Maeve, the healer, both staring at the great doors as they shook under the weight of the siege. The scene unfolded like a memory I'd stepped into. They've breached the lower gate, a soldier cried. We must close the hall. No, Maeve said sharply. If we lock ourselves in, the smoke will kill us. Lord Edric descended the stairs, his armor gleaming. We hold the hall, he barked. The walls will save us. They'll bury us, Thomas said quietly. Edric turned on him. You dare question me? Thomas met his gaze. I've seen what these walls have done. Every soul that dies here feeds them. You built this castle to defy death, but death is all it knows. For a moment, even the fire seemed to pause. Then Edric drew his sword. Then die with your doubt, he snarled. Maeve stepped between them. The circle must break, she said softly. Or it will claim us all. The world erupted, flames, shouts, stone splitting. The air filled with smoke and screams. I stumbled backward, choking. The vision blurred, fire became rain, the hall became ruin again. I was back in the tower, coughing, the mural glowing faintly in the flickering light. I dropped to my knees. Break the circle, I whispered. How? As if in answer, the ground shuddered. A deep, rolling sound echoed from below, the vaults. The iron door. Something was moving. I ran down the spiral stairs, nearly slipping on the wet stone. The air grew hotter the deeper I went, though the rain still fell outside. When I reached the courtyard, I saw smoke seeping up through the cracks between the stones, thin, ghostly smoke. The iron door below was wide open. I descended again, slower this time. The vault was alive with sound, whispers, echoes, the rush of unseen wind. The mural of the serpent glowed softly, its eyes like coals. The book lay on the floor where I'd left it, pages fluttering as if caught in a breeze. I picked it up. The last page was blank. I turned it over, but something was forming there, words, bleeding through from the paper itself. My name. A voice rose from the dark. Not one, but many, layered over each other like wine through hollow stone. You came to remember, they said. Now you must release. The ground cracked. A faint red light seeped up through the gaps, pulsing like a heartbeat. I stepped back, the book still in my hands. The air vibrated. This place was never cursed, I said aloud. It's just been waiting, for someone to stop believing the lie. I looked down at the ring in my pocket, the crest of Lord Edric, the symbol of fear disguised as protection. I held it above the pit and let it fall. It vanished into the glow. The light flared once, then faded. The sound stopped. The air went still. When I climbed back to the surface, the rain had stopped. The first light of dawn touched the towers, turning the wet stone to silver. I sat on the broken wall and watched as mist rose from the courtyard like breath leaving a sleeping giant. The castle was quiet now. Not dead, just finally at rest. I turned on the camera one last time. My voice was steady, almost calm. Every fortress, I said, starts with fear. Fear of enemies, fear of loss, fear of death. But fear builds walls that trap the very people they were meant to protect. Greystone wasn't a death trap because of its design, it was one because of its purpose. The people inside trusted walls more than each other. And when the fire came, the walls obeyed their nature, they kept them in. I looked up at the rising sun. Maybe that's the real lesson history tries to whisper. The moment we build too high to feel, to trust, to see beyond our own safety, that's when the trap closes. Not around us, but within us. The camera blinked red for the last time. I left it on the wall and walked away. Behind me, the light grew brighter, spilling over the ruins like forgiveness. As I reached the road, I turned once more. For a heartbeat, in the golden mist, I saw two figures standing by the gate, a man and a woman, side by side. Thomas and Maeve. They didn't wave. They didn't need to. The story was done. The wind carried a single whisper across the moor. The circle is broken. And then they were gone.